Tonight, welcome to day 3 of Living a Life of Balance. And tonight, fortunately, because Tom wants to learn about burnout, we're going to talk about burnout. What happens when you have too many irons in the fire. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, do you know where that saying came from, too many irons in the fire? Anybody? No, really?
Flat irons.
Flat irons?
Flat
Like a
irons.
hair?
No, as in ironing irons.
That's one thing, but where this particular phrase came from had to do with like the Old West, or I guess still in the South, where they would brand cattle. And they would get their branding irons and put them in the fire. But if they had too many of them in the fire would go out. So you couldn't have too many irons in the fire. So it really does have like a real beginning for that phrase, but now we use it to mean we just got too much going on, too many things to do, we got too many irons in our fire. So I thought you guys would have known that one. I'm happy that you didn't, so yay. Okay, another do you know thing. You guys, have you heard of Sisyphus? Dave Shaner should say yes because he preached on that a month or 2 ago, but I think he used it in his lesson. You guys know who Sisyphus is? Some of you? Yeah. Anyway, he was in Greek mythology, and according to Greek mythology, Sisyphus was condemned to roll a huge boulder up a steep hill. So he'd roll the boulder up, and he'd get to the top, and it would roll back down. So he'd have to go back down and roll it up again, forever and ever. And that's all he did. He was condemned to do that for his entire life, that useless, fruitless labor. And anyone who has experienced burnout can relate to the pushing a boulder up a hill, and it rolls back down. And I do it again. So Sisyphus is the Greek mythology version of that.
That's called laundry.
Laundry. It never ends. Yeah. So let's talk about what burnout is. We've all been overwhelmed by life. We've all been overwhelmed by responsibilities and relationships and circumstances. And we've all worn ourselves out by burning the candle at both ends. But have we been burned out? Well, there's no specific medical disorder called burnout. So maybe you have, maybe you haven't. You kind of get to decide. But it's well known that high stress over a long period of time has a lot of negative consequences. So there's an author, Dr. Jessie Hanley, I think is her name, Hanley, yeah, who's identified 5 levels of burnout. So let's take a look at those. They're in your thing, your handout. First of all, you're driven. That's when you feel good. You're a working beast, a nonstop blur of accomplishment. Ideas and enthusiasm come fast and easy. You're in the zone, you're productive, enthusiastic, and you feel like you could just do it forever. And you want to. You want to keep doing all these things. Then the next stage is dragging. You've been driven for a while now, and you're not quite as enthusiastic as you were. The ideas aren't coming quite as quickly. And you're sucking up sugar and caffeine because you're really tired. Maybe you're chugging ZQL at night so you can sleep. And you're starting to feel a little chubby. Then you start to lose it. You're losing it. You're definitely tired, visibly plump, or maybe pre-skeletal, getting too skinny, and perpetually grumpy. You lie awake at night, your thoughts racing, longing for sleep, but you can't sleep. And at work and at home, you've developed the charming habit of biting everybody's head off. Then the next stage, 4, is you're hitting the wall. You're racked by aches and pains, maybe gaining or losing a lot of weight, prone to temper tantrums or crying jags, and your memory starts to be affected. You can't remember things like your computer passwords or your children's names. And then you finally get to burnout. You are burned out. And by now you may have some kind of serious physical illness like heart disease or autoimmune disorder of some type. Maybe you've been in a car accident because your inability to pay attention. And to stay marginally functional, you depend on drugs that you either get from your doctor who thinks you're just a little bit depressed, or from some man that you only know as Viper. And, nobody likes you at this stage. But the silver lining, if you don't die during this stage, there's no place to go but up. So that was kind of a humorous look from this lady's book on burnout. But really, burnout is no joke. When we use that term burnout very loosely, kind of like we use the word love, we say we love French fries and we love the color green and we love summer and we love our kids. And burnout's the same way. We use it very loosely to mean many things. So here's an example where somebody might say they're burned out. Let's say you're a runner. You like to run and you've been running for years. And you're pretty serious. You run about 20 miles a week and do some half marathons and stuff like that. But now you've started to notice that it's not quite as much fun anymore. It's more like a chore. And you think twice before you get up and go running when you used to just look forward to it. Your running buddies might say, it is summertime, the day's beautiful, come on, let's go run. And you say, well, okay, but you don't really want to. And you kind of sigh and put your shoes on and head out the door, but it's a chore. And at that point, you might sit down and say, I'm really burned out on running. But are you burned out, or you just need a break from running for a while? I don't know. So we also say that we're burned out when we have too much to do, too much responsibility, too much stress for too long a time. Everybody and everything wants your attention and seems to want a piece of you. Work, school, family, friends, church, hobbies, everything wants a piece of your time. And mostly you like being involved in all that stuff. But after you've been so busy in all those things, so many different areas for so long, you might start to not enjoy it so much anymore. You're tired of it. You kind of feel just obligated to do it. And you become resentful of people who ask for your time. It's like if somebody just asks you if you can do something, you might bite their head off. It's like, oh, I've got too much to do. And you wonder, why can't anybody do anything themselves? You start getting really irritated. And why are they all so annoying? So your attitude starts to take a dive. When you reach this point, you might plop down and say, I am burned out. Maybe you are. Since there's no medical definition, you get to kind of make that call. But here's the best definition I could come up with. It's on your handout. Burnout is a state of emotional, physical, social, and spiritual exhaustion caused by prolonged stress. When the demands placed on you exceed your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual resources, and it continues for a long time, you're likely to shut down, and this is called burnout. So it's when you've had too much to do, too much stress for a long time, and you burn out. About, 8 years ago or so, I burned out the engine in my car. And I drove it until it burned out. So it was late at night, and I was driving back from Wild Waves at night, where Tom and the girls were with the youth group doing some youth thing or another. And so I'm driving back because I had something else to do, I guess, and the heat indicator started going. I'd never had that happen before, so I was a little alarmed, but I thought, oh, maybe I can get home. Well, it's a long way home from Wild Waves. And so it started, there was steam, but at first I didn't think it was coming from my car. It was dark, and I was going fast, so there was steam. And finally I realized, that's me. And so I pull over, try to call Tom, no answer. Try to call other people that I knew were at the event. Nobody's answering because they're in the water or whatever. And so I sat there and gave it a few minutes, and I was kind of freaking out a little bit. And the needle started to go back down. I didn't see any steam coming out, so I thought, okay. Started it up, and I went on towards home. And I say towards home because I didn't make it home. I crossed the intersection of 167 and 405 and then kind of coasted on fumes and prayers over to the side where there was enough shoulder to stop. And it wouldn't go anymore. So I called one of our neighbors, and they were home, and they came and rescued me. I was stressed. The car was burned out. It didn't go anymore. So that's kind of the difference between stress and burnout. When a car overheats, there's that little indicator on the dashboard that tells you there's trouble. It starts to move to the H, and it lets you know it's overheating. And there might be steam coming out too, and you really need to pay attention to those things if they happen. So our bodies don't have things that are that obvious in that kind of way where we can look at the gauge and say, oh, okay, I need to pay attention. But our bodies do give us some signals that say things are out of whack. And one thing I want to mention before we get into the different symptoms are there's the difference between stress and burnout. There's a difference. Stress is the idea of too much. When you're stressed, there's too much coming at you, too many responsibilities, too much. Burnout is the idea of not enough. I don't have enough energy, time, resources, care to deal with it. So stress involves too much, burnout involves not enough, okay? Okay, let's look at some symptoms of burnout since we don't have gauges on our foreheads that tell us when it's actually happening. And just because you have some of these doesn't mean you're burned out, but if you start having several of these, you might want to make some changes. So the first thing that I listed was chronic fatigue. In the early stages, you might just have trouble sleeping and feel tired a lot. But as you move towards burnout, you're gonna have trouble sleeping a lot of the time. You may get a good night's sleep, but you still wake up and you're exhausted. So it's chronic fatigue. And then related to that is insomnia. You may be really tired when you go to bed, but you just can't sleep. Or maybe you fall asleep, but you wake up a bunch. And sometimes your mind's just churning and you can't turn it off, thinking about all your problems. Other times, there's nothing going on in your head, but you still can't fall asleep. So as burnout progresses, this might become a nightly thing for you. It's not just occasionally, but more and more often. The third thing is problems with forgetfulness and poor concentration. And a lot of us are probably going to say, oh, I forget stuff all the time. Well, when it's combined with these other things, it's a problem, but we all forget stuff. But if your lack of concentration and your inability to pay attention to things gets to the point where it's hard to function at work or at home, that's a problem. If you forget things more often than normal, I mean, I forget stuff. I forgot the video camera and the visual aid. Those are kind of important things, but I don't think I'm burned out, you know? So you have to put it in context of these other things. And then the physical symptoms. When you're under so much stress for such a long period of time, it's hard on your body, and it can cause some scary symptoms that look like other serious illnesses. Stress over a prolonged period of time can cause chest pains, trouble breathing, dizziness, fainting, migraines, shortness of breath, severe stomach pains, that's kind of common, and other serious problems that you think are something else. So if you have those types of symptoms, go see your doctor and make sure it's not something more serious. Another thing is poor self-care. When people are overwhelmed and burned out, they tend not to take very good care of themselves. The things we've talked about already, they eat junk, they don't go to bed when they should, they don't exercise. Sometimes we'll have unhealthy coping strategies like drinking too much, or smoking, or sitting around and not getting enough exercise, stuff like that. Sometimes people will self-medicate. They'll take sleeping pills to sleep and drink alcohol to relax and drink a bunch of coffee to get some energy. So self-care goes out the window. I know this is kind of a boring list, but I do want to give you guys some idea of what the symptoms are. So just hang with me through the list part. Are you guys cold or hot?
I'm perfect.
I feel fine.
Okay. All right, just checking. All right, moving on. You're good?
Yes, we're good. We're good.
If you start shedding clothing, I'll know that it's
Yes,
really hot. Okay. So another thing is increased illness. If you start getting sick more often and you can't seem to shake it, and this happens for a period of time, that could be related to burnout. Loss of appetite, which I would welcome. That would be one wonderful side effect of burnout. But for a lot of people, they just don't feel like eating. Some people go the other way and they just eat a bunch. But basically, it's your appetite is affected in one extreme or the other. Anxiety, you might have an increase in anxiety, things that didn't used to make you anxious or worried. All of a sudden, you're worrying a lot. And depression, moods are going to go up and down. And when things are stressful, you'll have some more downs. But if you tend to be more depressed more often, that's another signal. Anger and irritability, that happens a lot on the way to burnout because people are just annoying when they're feeling that way. And I don't know what it is. It's like, you know, if you have kids. If you have kids, you know, when you get on the phone, that's when they're going to want you, or a dog. Any animal or child will want you on the phone. When you're really overwhelmed and stressed and on the way to burnout, that's when everybody needs you. I don't know what that is. Maybe we do have the dial on our heads.
We do.
Mosquitoes and carbon dioxide, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So you may start having angry outbursts where usually you don't. And every little thing ticks you off. You might overreact at things. Every little thing becomes a mountain. And this can cause problems that sometimes are irreversible. If you're snapping at people who you have to live with too much and this goes on for years, maybe that's not recoverable. So pay attention if your mood changes that much. Number 11 is loss of enjoyment. You used to enjoy stuff and now you don't. You used to enjoy doing things with friends, hobbies, activities, and now nothing seems fun anymore. Maybe at work, you used to enjoy your job, or at least tolerate it. And now as soon as you get there, you're looking at the clock, how many more hours do I have? So a change in your level of enjoyment. And then pessimism. People who are burned out don't tend to be very optimistic. And there's a reason for that. This is a little bit of biology for you. Stress hormones trigger that fight or flight thing. You've heard of that, I'm sure. And when you have those hormones increase, that narrows your focus so you can figure out what it is that's the danger, because that's just the way we're made to work. You're on the lookout for something that's out of place, something that's wrong. And that works great when there's a lion chasing you and you can go back to your cave and relax once you get away from him. But when modern everyday stress just keeps on day after day after day, it's like the lion's always chasing you. And your body's always at that heightened state. And so you're always subconsciously looking for something that is out of place or wrong. When you do that, that's when you get nitpicky and critical, because you're in that stressed state and your body's really doing what it's supposed to do, but there's no lion, okay? So a little bit of biology. And then that kind of leads to negative self-talk too. If everything's negative, you start bringing it onto yourself. So you may feel that nobody really cares how miserable you are, how hard you're working. You may become really sensitive and take every word and action personally. So it can really affect you in this area. Another thing that happens, especially as you tend to move more towards a burnout, is isolation. You may, like I said, people are annoying, especially during this time, and you just want to be left alone. So you start making excuses not to get together with people. Or even things you used to have fun doing, going to the movies. Maybe you just make excuses not to go because you're just done with people. Number 14 is a lack of productivity and poor performance. Burnout doesn't just happen overnight. It's not like you were fine yesterday, today, or so burned out you can't function. It's a process. And so think about yourself a year ago and think about, am I more productive now than I was a year ago or less? And if you're not as productive, ask yourself why that is. You may be working just as hard or harder and putting in more hours, but if you're burning out, your productivity goes down. And probably the harder you work, the more it goes down. So take a look at that. And then being preoccupied with work when you're not at work. And what this means is that when you're at work, you can't focus on work. But when you go home, all you can think about is how much work you have to do. Or if you don't work outside the home, when you're at home, you feel guilty for not doing a bunch of things outside the home. And when you're out doing stuff, you feel like you should be home doing the stuff there. So wherever you are, you worry about that other thing. You're never satisfied. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a better idea of what burnout looks like and the steps towards it anyway. So now let's go over some of the reasons we get burned out. And a lot of this is a review of what we've already talked about, so we won't go in depth into these things. But the number one reason is we feel obligated to say yes and we don't say no. And we talked about that a lot yesterday, so I think you get that one. And I'm going to make this clear too, is I'm not telling you to go around and start saying no to everything. Because really, we need a lot of you to say yes to some things. So don't think that's the problem. It's like, I'm saying no, Becca said we should say no. That's not it. But some people don't know how to say no. That's the problem. Some of you know how to say no really well. All right, second thing is procrastination, poor time management. And that makes your stress rise because we set ourselves up to have a whole boatload of things to do at one time if you put everything off until it has to happen. Like with hard deadlines, Christmas, it happens the same date every year, right? You'd think after a while we wouldn't wait until the week before to do everything, or Thanksgiving. Stuff like that, schedule yourself and think about it and don't procrastinate. Number 3, we tend to overestimate our ability to take things on and underestimate how much time and energy something's going to take. Okay, Tom probably doesn't know I do this, but I use something called the factor of 3 when dealing with Tom, my husband. And that has to do with when he tells me how long something will take. So I've come to realize over time that if he says he'll be home in about 20 minutes, I multiply it by 3 and realize he'll be home in an hour. Factor of 3. If he says that a chore or something around the house, he'll probably work on it most of the morning. I kind of estimate it'll be a few days. And that sounds funny, but that made my stress go down because people tend to overestimate their ability to do things quickly and underestimate how long something will take. And if I expect more than is reality, I'm going to be stressed, I'm going to be nagging him, and that's going to make him stressed. Because I used to do that. I'd be like, well, I thought it was going to take 20 minutes. Oh, you know? So to make the stress go down, I thought, factor of 3, I don't worry about it anymore. So, but people tend to do that. If you can get expectations in line with what reality is probably going to be, your stress will go down. Number 4, along those lines, we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves and others. This comes into play especially when you deal with someone who's difficult to get along with. And maybe you go into that situation, that interaction with that person every time thinking, maybe they won't act that way this time. I bet it'll be better today. Seems in a good mood. You know, then you get there. What do? They act like they always acted, right? And then you're upset because they acted like they always acted and you thought maybe today would be different. But it wasn't. So if you go into those situations thinking, they'll probably be kind of like they usually are, but I'm going to change the way I look at it. I'm not going to expect more. And if it does go better, then it's a bonus. It's like you feel happy. But if it goes like it usually does, you'll think, well, okay, I understand why. But I had somebody in my life when I was growing up that was really difficult to get along with, and I would go into visiting that person over the years and going back thinking, maybe this time will be better. It won't be so stressful. This person won't say mean, horrible things. And then you go there, and what do? Say mean, horrible things. And then I'm all stressed. So it only took me like 10 years to figure this out. But I thought, I won't expect any different. And then I'll instead think about what will I do when that person acts that way. So it's all in your mind how you can shift your focus. All right, the next thing, number 5, is we're addicted to speed, and just so you know, that's velocity, not narcotics. And we're impatient. Yes, fast, fast, fast. We want it now, we want what we want, we don't like to wait, we think there's something wrong if we're not busy. Some people seriously don't feel like things are okay if they don't have stuff to do. And
That's me.
well, you need to change that. Anyway, we're slowly making ourselves sick, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because we can't seem to slow down. Number 6, being a control freak. This one's pretty easy to understand. If you have trouble letting others have control of, well, anything pretty much, you'll be stressed and generally unhappy and resentful, because guess what? They're not going to do stuff the way you would do it. And you're, on the one hand, you're standing there wishing other people would step up and take on some responsibility, but on the other hand, when they do, you're like right there telling them how they're doing it wrong. That doesn't work. People don't like that. So that's a problem. If you're a control freak, you're going to be stressed pretty much all the time. So, yay you! 7, we already talked a little bit about lack of self-care. If you're burning the candle at both ends and not taking care of yourself, you're going to get yourself into burnout. That's all I'll say on it this time. Number 8, we spend more than we have, whether it's money, time, or energy. I'm going to give you a statistic now. Okay, as of 10 p.m. on June 20th, 2014, the United States had a public debt of $17,534,828,855,291.23. We spend more than we have on a big level.
That's right, Kelsey will pay it.
But we know how to do that. We know how to do that. We can't tell ourselves no.
You kids.
And that causes stress. Even just having that big $1 trillion thing hanging over our country is stressful, you know? But number 9, let's move on to number 9. We focus on the negatives. Attitude plays a huge role in how well you handle life's stressors. And when you make a habit of focusing on the negative stuff, you're subtly, but also directly impacting your emotions and your outlook. A negative attitude is like poison to your spirit. Read that 20 times. A negative attitude is like poison to your spirit. You don't have to focus on a negative thing. All right, so that's that list. What I'm about to tell you now is a preacher's story, so it's probably not true.
Definition.
I'm gonna tell it anyway, because it fits. All right. All right, preach a story. So several years ago, there was a Petco delivery truck that was going down the street making some deliveries, I don't know where, but making deliveries. And it was a long street with a lot of traffic lights, and every time he'd come to a stoplight, every time it turned red, the driver would jump out of the truck and grab a 2x4 and bang on the side of the truck, and then he'd jump in really quick so he could go when the light turned green. And he did that. At the next light, same thing, jump out, grab the 2x4 and beat on the truck and get back in. And there was a guy in another car following him down that same road, and he was just like, what is this guy doing? So at the next red light, the guy in the car behind sticks his head out the window and says, hey, what in the world are you doing? And the guy said, man, I've got 2 tons of canaries in this truck, but it's only a 1-ton truck. I got to keep half of them in the air at any one time. That's kind of corny, but it fits what we're talking about. We got so many things in the air, not canaries, but whatever. And we have to run frantically back and forth like the plate spinner on that first night we talked about. And you can't do that forever, you know. His deliveries probably took all week just because he had to get out every time he stopped. And yeah, so I like the story. It's a little hokey, but it made the point. So now we know all this information. What do we do with it? Well, again, let's look and see what the Bible tells us about that. And we're going to look at Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30, because Jesus tells us how to recover from and prevent burnout in those verses. So let's listen. Listen for the action words while I read that. Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. When you're burned out, you may indeed need to take some steps to simplify your life and to prioritize and manage your time. You might need to say no more often and all those things we talked about. But underneath doing all those things, making all those changes, you need a foundation to prevent burnout. You need the soul rest that verse is talking about. And that's different than the rest that we normally think of. So in this passage, as I was telling you to look at the action verbs, there's 3 of them we're going to talk about. He says, come, take, and learn. So the first one is come, which means come to Jesus. Turn to Him. In the New Testament, we can see that people came to Jesus for lots of different reasons. Some people came for healing or for forgiveness, for answers, or for salvation. But here Jesus says, you know, you could come to me for rest. And He says, I'll give you rest for your souls. And that's not just any kind of rest. That goes much deeper than physical rest. You're overwhelmed in your mind. You're overwhelmed in your spirit. You're overwhelmed in your emotions. And you need soul rest, because laying down in bed won't fix that stuff. You need release from your worry and from stress and from tension and from fear and from bitterness and all those negative feelings. That's soul rest. And He says, if you're worn out and tired, just come to me and I'll give you that. So think about it for a minute. Who or what do you naturally turn to when you're overwhelmed and stressed? If you're like most of us, you probably turn to a person, a friend, a spouse, a relative. You probably don't first turn to Jesus when things have gotten tough. Maybe you turn to food, or you turn on the TV and check out for a while, or you turn on Facebook or play a video game. Maybe you put on your earphones and go out for a run if you're not burned out from running like we talked about. But none of those things will give you that soul rest. Only God can do that. So let's look for a minute at Isaiah chapter 40, verses 30 and 31. And it says, even youths will become weak and tired. I'm reading out of the New Living. And young men will fall in exhaustion, but those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Verse 31, the beginning of verse 31 is really important because it says you'll find new strength. And that means it's not the strength that you have. It's beyond that. It's the strength from God. It's His supernatural strength. So how do you get it? It says, wait on the Lord. Oh, we don't wait very well, do we? The major antidote for your overloaded soul is not a time management plan or a program for stress reduction. It's not a philosophy and it's not a pill. The most important antidote is a person. Going back to Matthew 11, Jesus doesn't say, come to church and I'll give you rest, although I want you to come to church. Okay, it's not an either or. He doesn't say, come to church and I'll give you rest. He doesn't say, come to life group. He doesn't even say, come to the Bible. He says, come to me. So the answer for your overload is a person. It's Jesus. We all know the hymn, Just As I Am, right? And I love that hymn. It's in your handout there. But it talks about this exact thing. So if you don't mind, would you just sing verses 1 and 3 with me? That'll help wake you guys up, and plus I like the song. Just as
I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come. I come, just as I am, though tossed about with many conflict, many a doubt, fighting things and fears within, without, O Lamb of God, I come. I come.
If you think about that song, I think about that song a little differently after I've read those verses and really thought about it. But that's a really meaningful song. Another song that really fits our topic is Everlasting God by Chris Tomlin. That's also in your handout. And we've started singing that song sometimes in worship, and the words are just right on. So thinking back to the Isaiah passage about where our strength comes from and what we have to do, this song does that as well. So, do you guys know this?
Yeah.
Excuse me. So if you'll just sing the red, does yours have red words?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to sing the red words, all right? And I start at low because I sing low better. So. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord.
Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord.
Our
God, you reign forever. Our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're a defender